6.7% from last year. But remember, last year the buck harvest was up exactly 14.7%. So that's just part of that ebb and flow that we have, which is part of hunting. Across the state, actually the central forest zone and the southern farmland zone weren't that far off from last year, down just 3%, I think, for central forest, 6% for the southern farmland. It was really in the central farmland, which is really the biggest generator of harvest numbers, and then more so in the northern forest, where we saw the decline relative to last year, 10% in the central farm and closer to 20% in the northern forest. And the real driver behind the decline in harvest numbers is much more on the side of antlerless deer harvest. Again, in the central farmland, where a lot of those numbers are generated, and things backed off in the northern forest. And one thing we have to acknowledge is that that winter impact that we had last winter, especially for the northern forest and even the northwest part of the central farmland, certainly had an impact on deer populations. And at least in that part of the state, there were probably fewer deer in the landscape than there were last year at this time. As a relative comparison, we've had archery hunting in the form of bow hunting and crossbow hunting ongoing for 2 months in the state now, and the buck registration for archery hunting over that 2-month period is only running 2% behind where it was last year, which is still above the 5-year average. So certainly there was some things influencing the gun deer season that were making opportunities a little more challenging for more hunters this year. And for those that did come away, with expectations not having been met, and understandably, disappointed with the outcome of the 9-day season. Of course, just like other years, we still have opportunity to be had out there, especially in the farmland portions of the state. We're currently in the muzzleloader season, which will be followed by a 4-day antlerless season that will be statewide for those that have antlerless permits available, and then the holiday hunt that happens in select counties in the farmland zones, both central and southern farmland. There'll be 39 counties or deer management units participating in that holiday hunt this year. So then, just as a reminder, as we did last week, shortly after the press briefing here, we will upload a new table with the full 9-day harvest statistics to our harvest summary webpage, and that will be available, shortly after the press release. So with that, I'll stick around for questions later, but I'll turn it over to Lieutenant Weber.
Thanks, Jeff. Hey, everyone. So I'd like to open up about, again, the gun deer incidents that occurred this year. In addition to the 2 incidents that occurred over the opening weekend of the deer gun season, we had a third incident, which occurred on November 24th near midday, and that was in Rib Lake Township of Taylor County, when a 30-year-old male was a victim of a gunshot to the upper thigh. This occurred during a deer drive when a 35-year-old male shooter shot at a deer and then struck the victim. That victim ended up receiving treatment at the hospital. So this year during the deer gun season, we ended up having a total of 3 incidents. Those incidents all were non-fatal incidents. Compared to the 2022 deer gun season, those numbers are down. Of course, we had 8 incidents at that time, and then 4 of those incidents were self-inflicted. The average hunting incidents for the last 10 years throughout the deer gun seasons is 5.9 during the season. And in addition, there were no fatalities that occurred in 6 of those 10 seasons. Obviously, as we continue into December here, there's various hunting seasons that are continuing. So we just want to make sure to remind hunters that as you're getting out there, to really make sure to, again, follow those 4 main rules of firearm safety, otherwise known as the TABK formula, which we stress through the hunter education program. So the T, treat every firearm as if it were loaded. A, always point the muzzle in a safe direction. B, be sure of your target, what's before it, and what's beyond it. And the K, keep your finger outside the trigger guard until you're ready to shoot. This year, as we've said before, we've really been stressing the importance of that muzzle control, as well as making sure to properly identify your target and what's around it prior to shooting. Obviously with these, the hunter education program and these hunting incident statistics, I do want to take time to thank obviously our volunteer DNR hunter education instructors who have been instrumental in providing those firearm safety lessons to the public. And then as well as, of course, the hunters who have gone through the courses and have applied those practices in the field. The other thing I want to mention, obviously, with the seasons continuing and going on, obviously, we still do have our 24/7 DNR hotline, which is available to take information regarding natural resources violation or potentially unsafe hunting practices. So for those hunters that are continuing to get out there, please feel free to utilize that number. And again, that's 1-800-TIP-WDNR or 1-800-847-9367. I believe I'll be turning it back to OC quickly, who will then be opening up for questions at this time.
That's right. Thank you, Mike. Yes, we do have time for some Q&A. So if you have a question, please go ahead and raise your hand in the chat, and I will call on you to unmute. Mason Dowling, please go ahead.
Hello, can everybody hear me all right?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. So this, sorry, scanner right behind me. Okay, so this is either for, I think this question would be more for Jeff, more so than Michael, but wanted to see, overall trend-wise, is this a fairly normal year for the hunt? I know you said you were talking about the ebb and flow. Obviously, things kind of go in cycles. Is there anything that really sticks out to the DNR about this year compared to years past?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Mason. I would say one of the things that we always kind of we tend to want to do is just make those comparisons from one year to the next, and that's natural. But because of the variation that we can see from year to year, we try to put more emphasis on comparing this year to like a 5-year average. And that's where last year we were on the high end of the 5-year average. This year we're on the low end of that 5-year average. And so it's not, I think we're going to end up, higher than we were in our 2019 results, but we're not going to hit last year's mark. So it's going to be, again, shading on the lower side of the 5-year average, but certainly not unprecedented.
Thanks, Jeff. Danielle Kading, go ahead.
Hey, thanks for taking my question. A couple things. One, I'm wondering, Jeff, was it more the winter severity last year that led to some of this decline that we've seen this year compared to last, or was it also like the lack of snow and warm conditions? What were all the factors that played a role in the 9-day season?
Yeah, thanks, Danielle. And I could probably come up with a half a dozen factors or variables that influence this. And that's part of the intrigue of hunting. And one of the things we as hunters, and myself included, do, sitting around the table or the campfire speculating on what was it. And depending on where you were in the state, those reasons might be different. So if we were to just say, here's 4 things that were at play, depending on any individual hunter's experience. And again, we had hunters that had their best deer season ever, hunters that had their worst deer season ever. This year, statistically, you're probably, unfortunately, a few more people find themselves in that camp on the side of, the season didn't meet their expectations, myself included. I think I logged 14 hours on opening weekend without seeing a deer. So I'm right there with those folks that were on that side of the equation this year. So it's a number of things. We shared before the deer gun season that we did anticipate not meeting last year's harvest numbers due to that snow factor. We had snow cover throughout the season last year, which we don't get all that often. So we knew that enhanced the 2022 numbers. And so, if we're going to compare what happened this year just to 2022, yes, that had an influence. But again, more often than not, we don't have snow on the ground. And so conditions in general weren't that challenging for hunters this year as far as weather and landscape access, those types of things. But there's just other things that were at play, and it just all kind of gets wrapped up in the ups and downs of hunting.
And then as a follow-up, Jeff, do you happen to have the numbers on the total number of deer registered during the season and the licenses sold?
Sure. So total registration numbers right now, which again they're preliminary, and they'll be available again in the table that we'll post here shortly. And I'm not looking at it right now, so it was 173,000 and change is where we're at right now with the registration numbers for the 9-day season. And license sales this year trended just a little less than 1% behind last year. I think we're at 0.8% down from last year. And that fits within the trend we've been seeing, as we shared, over the recent decades, actually. And actually less than 1% decline in license sales is better than what we've been seeing in recent years. It tends to run between 1% and 2%. So yeah, that's where we came out this year.
Jake Forrest, go ahead.
Hello, thank you guys for getting on here. I had two questions I wanted to ask. There had been reports with the chronic wasting disease in some of the harvest this year. So I just wanted to get kind of an indication on how much CWD you guys saw in this year's harvest. And also just I'm up in Rhinelander, so I guess the number, like specifically what did the final harvest look like for Oneida County?
Sure. Thanks, Jake. As it relates to CWD sampling and those results, we're right in the midst of that, with the samples being processed, and there's a little bit of a turnaround time there. So it's kind of premature to make any declaration on what we're seeing this year relative to other years. And but there's also then the effort as it relates to how sampling is going this year. And I see Aaron is on the call. Those of you that were with us last week, Aaron's our our deer health specialist that really is more plugged into the CWD stuff. So Aaron, if you're available, I'll turn the mic over to you for just a bit to address that part of his question.
Sure, thanks, Jeff. So as mentioned, we are definitely in the thick of our CWD sampling. So all of the results, all of the deer that were submitted for sampling from the 9-day are now going through our processing center and being submitted to the lab for the test. So we have received some results back from the 9-day. So those that we were able to process Monday through Wednesday of last week after the opening weekend, we got those to the lab. We bring samples every night and we have those results back to those hunters, but we still have a lot more. As you can imagine, the volume from the 9-day is very high, the highest, of course, for the year for CWD sampling. And so, it's too early to know what those totals will look like. We do have results that include positives every night as well. So as soon as we get those results, we're sending those out to the hunters. So at this point for the season, we have sampled close to 9,000 deer, have 6,300 for the results back, and then 777 are positive so far. We do have that information on our website, so you can go to CWD results and see those numbers as they will change every day. So still in the middle of that, so unable to make any other number projections, but we'll be working through that in the next couple of weeks.
Thank you, Aaron. Raymond Newport, please go ahead.
Question here. You had mentioned that we're seeing more action towards the archery season numbers being normal from last year as well. Is this part of this long-term trend that we've been seeing, that more hunters are taking advantage of archery / crossbow and the alternate hunting times as opposed to just the 9-day season?
Yeah, thanks, Raymond, for that question. And indeed, this is a long-term trend that we've been seeing really over 30 years of this slow, gradual shift towards what I describe as more enthusiasm for deer hunting in general, that hunters want to participate in deer hunting more than just the 9-day gun season. And to that effect, as I talked about last year, over half of our total deer hunting population in Wisconsin now also hunts with archery equipment, whether that be bow or crossbow. But we won't call of the final on that until the seasons are over. But for the last 3 years, that shift has kind of stabilized to where about 40% of the buck harvest occurs with archery equipment and 60% with firearm during the 9-day season. So we'll see if that continues to stabilize or if we see a little bit more of a shift there or not. I do want to go back to Jake's question about Oneida County. We moved on because he had a specific question about that coming from Rhinelander. And relative to the Northern Forest success rates or difference from 2022, actually Oneida County and Vilas County didn't see as big of a drop as some of the other surrounding counties, which was, it still certainly was down, but relative to, again, the 5-year average, not just last year. And I'm looking here, Oneida County is the buck harvest during the gun season is only off 5% from the 5-year average. Just want to make sure I get that right. Yeah, and Vilas is a little closer to 10 or 11%, but not as, ahead of the average for the rest of the Northern Forest.
Thank you, Jeff. Danielle, did you have a follow-up question?
I did. Well, a couple. One, how much was the harvest down in the northern forested region, and were there any new detections of CWD during this season?
So for the Northern Forest specifically, again, just compared to last year, the overall harvest number was down 30%. It was down 35% as it relates to antlerless deer. Buck harvest was down closer to 20, looks like 27% for the Northern Forest. And as it relates to the CWD sampling, I can't speak to that part of it. And as Aaron shared earlier, I'll give her a chance to address that question.
Yeah, so we had 2 new counties that had their first positive prior to the 9 days. So that was Polk and Trempealeau for wild positives. So those were, again, prior to the 9-day, and for the 9-day, we're still working through all of our results. So we don't have any new counties to report at this time, other than those 2 from prior to the 9 days. So we'll see as we get the rest of our results through, if anything else is new.
Thank you. Or Danielle, go ahead.
Oh, I just saying thank you.
Oh, great. Okay, Wyatt, Barbara Pooley, go ahead.
Yeah, talking about the higher deer population because of the lower harvest, we talked a little bit about the CWD angle, but what will it mean for interactions with humans generally? What will be the environmental impact of more deer on the way we interact with them in their world and the way they come into ours?
Yeah, thanks, Wyatt. I think, kind of coming from Southeast Wisconsin, there isn't anything that's dramatic about what's happening this fall that's going to change the trends we've been seeing, again, over the last couple of decades in Southeast Wisconsin. As I mentioned earlier, the harvest this year in the southeast part of the state really isn't off that much from the past. But again, following a long-term trend, the challenge of achieving an adequate harvest that does have that balancing effect on the deer population is more challenging in the south, and especially the southeast part of the state, where a lot of deer exist on the landscape in areas that they simply aren't accessible to the hunting population. So that's been an issue for a long time, and will continue, and is something to help us, discuss down the road when we see opportunities to maybe, shape some changes. But nothing is going to change much based on what we've seen happen this year.
Thanks, Jeff. Matt Fry, go ahead.
Good morning. Hey, question for Jeff here. the earlier start this year, one of the earliest starts we can have. I guess the common thinking normally is, maybe the rut is still hanging on in some areas of the state. And yeah, obviously this might be a depends on where you are kind of question, but what were there any kind of reports? Was the rut still hanging on in some areas? Did hunters have any success with bucks that way?
Yeah, when you think about it, just again across the state and the vast opportunities for people having different experiences, every year we get some reporting in that, hey, we still saw bucks chasing does or attending scrapes and that type of thing, which would indicate increased buck activity. So in a year like this year, I think that was part of the expectation and anticipation, because as you said, we had a pretty early opener, and that usually enhances that. And like every other year, we have gotten those reports. Yep, there was still some evidence of buck breeding activity. However, I think relative to what we hear every year, it probably wasn't as great as I think a lot of us expected. I myself, I was hunting up north opening weekend, and was very encouraged by the amount of buck sign I saw on Friday in terms of fresh scrapes and whatnot. And it just didn't play out on Saturday or Sunday, for me to have any daytime deer movement. And I think across the state, there was kind of a theme that, we just didn't see that to the degree that we may have expected, daytime buck activity. Certainly happened, and there's tens of thousands of people that experienced that and would say, oh no, we saw buck activity. But on the other end of the spectrum, there's tens of thousands and maybe more that didn't see that happening this year, and that influenced their deer sightability and opportunities.
Thanks, Jeff. Jake Force, go ahead.
Mike, this one is probably for you, but you said the incidents were down from last year, but nonetheless there were still somebody was still shot. I guess just what are you guys highlighting as far as safety, and just I guess what needs to go better next year, or what went better this year from last year? Just kind of just another review of the incidents and how they can be avoided, I guess.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Jake. Appreciate the question. Over the last 10 years, when you look at those incidents, they do tend to fluctuate. Some years you may have an increase during the deer gun season. Some years you have the decrease. Obviously, from the hunter education program in DNR, we always hope for 0 incidents. I mean, that'd obviously be the best case scenario. This year having 3, like I said, that is a very low year. And I guess overall, it can be dependent upon the year, but like I said before, really attribute some of those reduced rates to, I guess, the work of the hunter education program and those volunteer instructors. So really focusing on, that safe firearm handling training, and then really enforcing those 4 main rules of firearm safety, or the TABK formula that we talked about. Again, going into next year, we're going to continue to always look at the data that we have, how incidents are occurring. I spoke before about self-inflicted incidents, and the fact that, last year during 2022, 50% of our incidents were self-inflicted. So going into this year, we really worked on, obviously, stressing TABK overall. That's super important, but really hitting on muzzle control, making sure that people are aware of that, because, if they're following that proper muzzle control, you really can't have those self-inflicted injuries at that point if you're controlling the muzzle. So again, from our point, those incidents tend to fluctuate every year, but we're going to use the best data that we have to continue to reduce those incidents, prevent those incidents from occurring, and then really focusing on that safety messaging, and make sure that hunters are really following those safe firearm practices, and then actively doing them when they get out in the field.
I'm sorry, I would have a quick follow-up to that. When you say self-inflicted incidents, like what exactly kind of incidents are you referring to?
So a self-inflicted incident would be when somebody would shoot themselves when they're out there.
Okay, so it's not like does it also entail like the lack of, like poor construction on someone's stand cause them to fall? I mean, like, would that also be considered self-inflicted?
Yeah, so like this would be separate of the tree stand incident fall. So in Wisconsin our hunting incidents, so those are going to be, the discharge of a firearm, bow or crossbow, where somebody gets injured by that projectile. So that would not include tree stand incidents. So those self-inflicted incidents are when somebody would shoot themselves. Obviously though, the tree stand safety is extremely important. And we also stressed that multiple times this year, ensuring that people are inspecting their stands prior to use, making sure they're structurally sound and safe, and inspecting their buckles, straps, replacing any parts that need to be replaced. And then as well as, of course, those safety measures when climbing up and down the stand, as well as to making sure to always wear a full body harness anytime you're going up in the stand.
Thanks, Mike. Danny Spacek, you have a question?
Yes, thank you. Jeff, I'm just wondering how the harvest went in Langlade County, where my paper is, and I'm guessing it was lower like most of the counties. And do you know if there's any specific reason that that particular area of central Wisconsin had a worse harvest, if so?
Yeah, thanks, Danny. I really don't. The specific numbers, as we shared, you'll be able to see Langlade, relative to Lincoln and some of the other counties in the area, when the updated table comes up. I do recall that last year, Langlade was one of those that really had a nice jump in registration. So relative to last year, this year's numbers are more likely to look off because, compared to the really enhanced or great season they had last year, that's just, the way we're positioned this year. I can't really offer anything that's different for that region of the state of the north than anywhere else. It was kind of universal across the north, when you look at compared to last year. However, when you look at the 5-year average, you do see that impact of the winter we had in the Northwest, where those counties are further off their 5-year average than the North Central and the Northeast counties.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
Matt Fry, go ahead.
Oh, hi. One more question here for Jeff. I'm here in the Northern Forest here as well, and I know it's a conversation piece from a lot of camps and social media, but just when we talk about lower numbers, what is the DNR's thoughts right now on the relationship between deer and the predators out there? Is there any kind of effect on that, from that standpoint?
Yeah, what's interesting about when you try to talk about the predator-prey relationship, it's a moving target year to year. And so it's reasonably understandably one of those topics, we talk about and you want to try to make a connection. And it's always nice to have a very black and white or a easy, 2 + 2 = 4 formula that we look for. And we're prone to say, well, there's the connection. In the big picture, it's really more complicated than that. There's a number of things that are of influence. And we could say this year, predators played this amount of a role in the deer population trend, and next year could be very different. Research does suggest that during more severe winters, like we had last year, that does tip the scale in the favor of like large carnivores like wolves. But then in the mild years, it goes the other way. So it's hard to just say this is a standard influence on an annual basis. It's just, again, one of those things that influences the ebb and flow of hunting from year to year. And so, that's part of what we live through and adjust accordingly. The way our system is set up is so now at the end of all the seasons, we will add everything up and take stock. And that's what the hunters shared with us this year is what will help inform, the path that we take next fall. And we have that ability to make those adjustments.
Thanks.
Yep.
Okay, I see no other questions in the chat, so I think we're going to go ahead and wrap up for this morning. If you have additional questions or you're watching this after the fact, go ahead and send us an email at dnrpress@wisconsin.gov, and we will help get your questions answered as soon as we can. Thanks for tuning in this morning. Have a great day, everybody.